A vintage steam locomotive weighing over 100 tons.
It became an icon for steam.
Can these British engineers bring it home on an epic journey across 2 continents?
What's wrong?
Against a merciless deadline, the team must navigate treacherous roads,
Start going out, Bob.
jammed rail routes,
It's blocking the railway lines.
and stormy oceans.
There's the 5-metre swells forecast going round the Cape.
Over 70 days and nights.
It's freezing outside, but you will die in this place.
One super long locomotive, one team on a mission to move it. A titanic task that will test the nerves of the people that dare to do monster moves. The city of Bloemfontein lies in the heart of South Africa. Once a major railway hub, steam engines passed through this region every day, hauling goods and people across the country. But today, Bloemfontein is where old steam engines go to die. At this yard, they dismantle 1 locomotive a week to sell for scrap. But there is one unlikely survivor. This majestic 60-year-old engine. The 15F is one of the last surviving locomotives of its kind. A classic from the golden age of steam. It was built in Glasgow by the North British Locomotive Company, the largest locomotive factory in Europe in the early 1900s. At its peak, the factory shipped 400 locomotives a year all over the globe from the Americas to the Far East. More than 2,000 locomotives were exported to South Africa alone. To safeguard the future of this precious engine, a museum in Glasgow has sent one of Britain's leading heavy haulers, Andrew Goodman, on a rescue mission to Bloemfontein.
Whether that'll come home to the UK or not, we'll have to wait and see. I'm told as a babe in arms, my parents took me to the Vale of Rheidol Railway in Wales, and I don't know whether it was the inhalation of the smells of the oil and the steam, but it got into one's body, and it's been a thing ever since. But the railways are not only an interest, but a passion.
Joining Andrew is engineer and fellow steam enthusiast Jim Mitchell.
It worked right across the spectrum, hauling goods all over South Africa. So it became an icon for steam in South Africa.
This locomotive ran for 40 years. It pulled the prestigious Blue Train along the 1,600-kilometre route from Pretoria to the Cape.
It's really important to take one home, as much for the people of Glasgow themselves, because a good part of their heritage has been forgotten.
But moving this 15-metre locomotive almost 10,000 kilometres back to Glasgow will be a big challenge. The team's first task is to haul it 650 kilometres across the South African bush to Durban. If they miss the ship waiting in port, it will be a long time before another arrives with a big enough cargo hold. Then the loco must survive the legendary storms of the South Atlantic on a 75-day voyage home.
Looks nice, doesn't it? Hey?
Yeah, it certainly looks...
Quite a beast.
Andrew has 7 days to transport the locomotive to Durban docks, but first he must work out how to get it there.
There's basically 3 options that we can pursue for moving the locomotive. The first option would be to steam the locomotive to Durban under its own power. Wouldn't it be fantastic, steaming across the South African countryside? A rail journey of a lifetime, that is for sure.
Moving the loco by rail is risky. Its boilers are old and weak. They have not been fired up for over 20 years and could explode. The team could shunt the locomotive with a diesel engine, but these freight lines are busy. Securing a route is notoriously difficult and expensive.
The second option would be to actually dismantle the locomotive into basic component parts, the boiler, the chassis with the wheels, all the pipework, the cladding on the boiler, all the cab fittings would have to be taken off, the cab itself dismantled. Quite a time-consuming operation.
Originally, the loco was shipped to South Africa from Glasgow in sections. In the 1940s, there were no cranes on the continent big enough to lift this 100-ton dead weight, so workers assembled the engines in the dockyards in sections. Carefully disassembling the fragile 60-year-old loco could take weeks. And that's too long for Andrew. He will miss the boat.
There we are. Yeah.
This leaves him with just one option: to haul the locomotive intact by road. Andrew's never moved such a heavy locomotive this far before. It's a daunting prospect.
There's always the unexpected, the unknown. We're not sure quite what the roads are like. It's not motorways, that's for sure.
Before the road journey to Durban can begin, the locomotive must be winched onto a low loader fitted with special rails. The big question: is the trailer strong enough, and are there sufficient wheel axles to support such a heavy load? If the load is balanced unevenly, they could face problems on South Africa's bumpy roads, and their nightmare is crossing a weak bridge. Ideally, Andrew needs a trailer with 6 axles to spread the weight of the locomotive. Chains will lock the loco in position to prevent it shifting on the road. The first challenge is to build a loading ramp from the train tracks to the trailer.
This is holding the track in place because the lip of the wheel is to the inside. So if you don't hold it in place, it's going to push the tracks out, and then the train is going to fall down.
Jim's concerned about the height of the load. It may be too tall to even leave the yard.
140 millimeters, too big to go under the gate.
Well, this is the only access that we can use to where we've had to load the loco today. But the actual beam is 6 inches too low to let us come out with the loco on. It's burning the bolts that hold the sign down.
They're taking that thing off.
It's a bad omen. They haven't checked the road ahead and hope there are no low bridges en route. Before they can even get underway, disaster strikes. An unexpected visit from the transport police. They're concerned that the trailer is not sturdy enough to support such a heavy weight.
We forwarded to the company a drawing of the locomotive showing all the weights, all the dimensions, and we indicated what we estimated the dry weight of the loco to be, which was about 95 tons. It appears that the trailer they've sent down, it wasn't really up to the job.
The police prohibit Andrew from driving the locomotive on this trailer, and there is no larger vehicle available within 1,000 kilometers. The ship sets sail in 7 days' time. Unless they can find another way of transporting the locomotive to Durban, the voyage home could be delayed for months. It's Tuesday in Bloemfontein, and Andrew is desperate to find the quickest way of taking this vintage loco to Durban docks. The transport police have banned it from the road, so he's now pinning his hopes on the railway.
Going into the Spornet offices. This is where all the planning is done for the train movements. So we'll go and see what they've got to say.
Andrew wants the rail network, Spoornet, to provide him with a diesel engine to shunt the locomotive 650 kilometers.
Come to see Sol Rudemeyer, please.
Approval for such a risky operation can take months, but Andrew has just a few hours to convince officials to allow the old loco on their tracks, and he only has 6 days before the ship departs.
As long as we can make Durban for Monday, that really is the critical now. We need to try and be in Durban for Monday.
Make promises, but I really going to try my best.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The fastest route to Durban is along the freight track. The only problem is that trains running on this line travel at 90 kilometers per hour. If Andrew were to run his loco at this speed, the bearings would probably seize up, leaving the 100-ton Leviathan blocking the freight line. The only alternative is to run the train on a minor rural route, which is rarely used. The team can travel more slowly, but there are added risks. This track is extremely remote. If they break down, they could be stranded for days. Even if Andrew can secure a route, the locomotive may not be in a fit state to ride it. This engine has not moved on rails for over 20 years. Even though it won't be running under its own steam, it will need a complete overhaul to survive this journey.
We can't rely on anything on the locomotive to play its part in a moving train. Now we're working frantically to make sure that absolutely everything is going to run smoothly.
The team must grease every moving part. It takes over 60 liters of oil to lubricate the locomotive.
We need a lot of oil for this loco.
Spornet's precondition is that Andrew provides a steam driver to maintain the loco on its journey.
We've got a Spornet driver coming down from Johannesburg, and he's going to go with the locomotive for us to Durban.
All they need now is a cab strong enough to stop him falling through the floor.
The wooden floor's disintegrated a little bit. I think we'll go and see if we can get some plywood, because if we are going to be riding on here late at night, we don't want to step down there. Could be rather dangerous.
But Andrew's mission to find a hardware store soon degenerates into farce.
My colleague seems to be adamant there is one, so... Ah. I wonder if that's what he meant. Oops, hang on. I'm actually looking for a builder's merchant or a timber yard. Do you know if there's one nearby? No? No? OK, thank you. OK, thank you. Bye. No good there. We'll have to try elsewhere.
Back at the yard, Jim is wrestling with another problem.
The brakes don't work. What we have is a very simple brake shoe which hangs loose on a pin there. There is no braking power, no motive power. It's completely dead.
The locomotive's old brakes are worn out, so they must be completely disabled. They will use the diesel engine's brakes, but it doesn't have enough braking power to stop 100 tons of locomotive. In the hilly terrain ahead, a runaway loco could end in disaster. To prevent this, empty wagons will be coupled to the rear of the train to add extra braking power. Each wheel on the wagon is fitted with a brake. One wagon is capable of supplying 13 tons of braking force. The team must hook 10 wagons to the rear of the locomotive to provide enough braking power to bring the train safely to a halt. Jim's anxious to test the brakes. They rely on vacuum pipes linking each wagon. When air rushes into these pipes, the brakes engage to stop the wheels. The brake pipes on each wagon connect along the full length of the train to form one continuous vacuum channel. The pipes on the locomotive are also part of the chain, completing the vital link between the diesel engine and the wagons behind. Here, the driver controls the vacuum along the channel to engage or release the brakes. Jim's worried that the pipes in the locomotive are rusted. If there's a leak, the vacuum could be lost, causing the brakes to fail on all 10 wagons. Yard manager Lucas uses an old steam engineer's trick to inspect all the pipes for holes.
If there's any leaks on the vacuum side, the flame will get inside wherever the leak is like that. There's a leak. So there's something wrong with here. Now I have to fix it, or else you don't have any brake.
Meanwhile, Andrew's finally found what he's been looking for.
What a beautiful smell. 2.5 inch. That'll do. A bundle of mass. Pack of that. Right, there we are. That'll do nicely. All aboard the Skylark.
While the team repair the old cab floor, Andrew is summoned back to Spornet's offices.
We've just had an urgent phone call to come quickly.
What time
Just to be
was?
safe, what time are we leaving here?
6:45 tomorrow morning.
Right, that's the earliest.
Spornet decide to risk taking the old loco on the rural route and even provide a diesel engine to tow it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Hello, Pete.
This is the certificate.
I can go.
But just as his team are ready to roll, Andrew hits another last-minute hitch.
Well, we got the result we wanted, so now I've got to go and find my driver, and who's missed his flight from Johannesburg. I mean, at the last minute, how on earth could anything further go wrong? So as long as we get him here, by the look of it, we're going at 6:45 in the morning. There we are, all in the love of steam.
It's Friday morning. After 60 years, the locomotive is finally set to embark on an epic 10,000-kilometer journey back home to Scotland. Driver Pete has only just arrived from Johannesburg.
I've got to be honest with you, a few moments ago it was quite emotional actually, just stood over there watching everybody just going round and checking.
It's quite an emotional moment, really. I don't look emotional, but I am.
There we are, nice steady run now.
Locomotives onto the ship. Who could ever have guessed that one would come back? It would have been beyond anybody's imagination that such a thing could have happened.
The first few kilometers will be critical. Pete, the driver, fears that the wheels may overheat and become damaged.
First 25 k's is a very dangerous thing to do, you see.
It takes them over an hour to travel the first 25 kilometers. But even at this slow pace, the wheel bearings are heating up rapidly.
They're getting a little warm.
We'll get Peter to check the side rods over here because they're much hotter on this side than they are on the other side. One's just a bit too hot, I think.
Old grease may be clogging up some of the bearings. Over the years the locomotive has been in storage, dust and dirt has fused with the grease, forming a brittle mass. With no lubrication, the friction could generate enough heat to melt the inside of the bearings. If that happens, the wheel could seize, causing severe damage to the locomotive. Constant lubrication is the only way of preventing a breakdown which could jeopardize the entire move. They force new sticks of grease into every bearing. As they melt, they flush out any old solidified lubricant.
What we don't want is this loco, any of this motion, any of the rods, any of the axles getting hot, with a chance of running a bearing, basically, because that'll just stop it all then.
They must make a pit stop every 25 kilometers along the 650-kilometer route to re-grease the bearings. At this pace, they will be lucky to make it.
You never know what's going to happen next, do we? We're just going to hope that, you know, we maintain this speed, nothing gets too hot, nothing causes us a problem.
Although it's winter, daytime temperatures on the savannah can reach 30 degrees centigrade. This takes its toll on the locomotive. Suddenly, Jim hears something worrying.
I'm hearing a click, a rhythmic click on the left-hand side that I haven't heard before.
Jim stops the train so they can find out what's wrong.
I'm concerned that there's an old fracture on this brake assembly, just in there. What worries me is if it catches and tears it.
Part of the brake shoe is broken and is rubbing against the coupling rod. If nothing is done, it could seize.
This loose part.
They're too far away from the nearest town, and with no tools or power, Jim is stuck. They've been stranded here for over an hour. Jim devises a makeshift repair so they can keep going.
Chances are that'll fall out.
They all seem quite friendly, they all wave to you. Everybody waves to a train, anywhere in the world. Anybody always waves to a train.
To make up for lost time, the rail network insists that the train carries on through the night.
It's cold. It's freezing outside.
They're traveling through mountains where temperatures can plummet below zero. So having sweated all day, they now face shivering all night.
Well, it's going to get very cold tonight, and if we are going through the night, we're going to need a bit of heat, so we can have a heater, which we'll put in the tender here.
To make us some warmth tonight. Otherwise, you will die in this place.
We might survive now. There we are. We might be able to keep hypothermia at bay. Lighting a fire out? Good. Carry on. Strike the match. I hope it's good South African coal.
Fabulous. Luxury.
I never thought I was going camping in South Africa when I came on this job. It's about 52 hours non-stop. So goodness knows what state we're going to be in tomorrow night or Sunday morning. But there we are, all in the name of steam. This was 2 inches of frost and ice on here. And the views this morning when the sun came up was absolutely breathtaking, it really was.
After 2 days and 2 nights, the team finally reaches Durban.
Now, basically, we had tonight off, and the ice cold beers wait. That's all.
My bed beckons. Taxi?
For now, they can retire to bed. but they have little inkling of the nightmare that awaits tomorrow along the final 800 meters of track to the dockside. It's Monday morning in Durban. The 15F locomotive has made it just in time to catch the ship that leaves today. There's just one snag. Andrew's plan to shunt the locomotive the 800 meters to the quayside is falling apart before it's even begun.
We have a small technical problem. The diesel locomotive's broken. They're waiting for a fitter to come. We asked him how long, and he just sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, sometime today.
And there's more bad news. The ship is being diverted.
All I'm concerned about at the present is we get this thing on the boat, where it goes to afterwards. As long as we get it into the Northern Hemisphere, we'll sort it from there. But really, we don't want to go to Antwerp, and we don't want to go to Hamburg.
We're going to Hamburg.
The only way to get the loco to Glasgow is to unload it 500 kilometers away in Immingham, where they have a big enough crane. This was originally the ship's destination, but now it's been diverted to Hamburg in Germany. So the team will now have to unload the locomotive in Germany and then charter a second ship to take it to Britain. But first, they must get the loco to the ship, a task that will test their patience to the limit. After a 2-hour wait, the shunter finally arrives. But the old dockside rails are worn and rarely used.
Did you see the concrete at the gate?
No. The what?
Concrete on the track at the gate. You should be able to cut through it there now.
Jim is concerned that the rails are so deeply buried, the loco may career off the track.
It could derail because the rails are so clogged with dirt at the front.
Then, with just a few hundred meters to go, they're thwarted once more. An abandoned truck is blocking the line.
It was arranged for today that we go down, so they knew we were coming.
Because we're going to lose this.
If we lose this shunter, we're in trouble. There's a crane down on the end of the berth there, and there's a boat over there waiting for us.
With the ship due to sail in just 4 hours, they must move this truck. But its battery is dead.
The set of jump leads that they've brought are only really fit for starting a car. They would just melt with the current that's needed to start this engine. I don't have a lot of confidence because when they went to connect up the leads, they were putting them in the wrong place.
So as far as I'm concerned, I've just booked a crane.
The team are about to lose their shunter engine on another job. They can hide their frustration no longer.
They don't have the right gear. They'll never start it like that.
We could end up losing this engine.
That's what really bothers me. We've got 16 people here, another 4 or 5, we could just lift the truck out the road.
Just when they are about to give up, a boss from the Port Authority arrives.
That's what we need, somebody to kick ass.
We're going to sort this out within a few minutes.
Yeah.
I've got the operations manager to come here as well, and this should have never happened.
Okay.
But we'll sort it out.
I'll leave it with you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What did they say?
He's sorting it out.
But the thing is, who gives these people permission to park here?
We always park here.
The boss calls in the heavy artillery.
Oh, that's a serious forklift. That's what I call a forklift. Hey, get your car out of the road.
Track's clear, so we can advance a little further. Only a little further.
Well, at long last, that was what, 3 hours? If we'd done that to start with, we could have been in position by now.
And the things that have happened, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely incredible.
the old adage of what can go wrong will go wrong.
Amazing, really.
It's like
absolutely
it's
amazing.
like snakes and ladders, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You seem to be getting somewhere, and then you go, and then you go up again.
There we are.
The locomotive finally makes it to the dockside. The team's next challenge is to load it onto the ship.
The original plan was to lift it with the ship's crane because the shipping company insisted that their cranes were strong enough to lift the locomotive. As it transpires, they're not large enough, not by a long shot.
There's only one crane big enough to handle this load, a giant floating crane.
It's not very often we get to lift locos like this. It's a pleasure.
The crane will lift the locomotive off the quayside and then float it to the other side of the port where the ship, the Diamond Land, awaits. It's a risky maneuver for a vintage steam engine.
Well, obviously, we don't want to do any damage to the locomotive, so we must make sure that the wires are well clear of the cab. Obviously, at the front, we're going to have to be very careful because the smoke deflectors are on the side of the locomotive. So again, we don't want any crushing. We don't want to damage it at this stage.
To protect the locomotive when it's lifted, they must build a rigid lifting cradle. The lift will not be easy because the loco has no anchor points to attach the cradle, and bolting it onto the locomotive's weak frame could cause irreparable damage. The only option is to suspend the cradle from the underside of the locomotive. But it's hard to find a secure position for the lifting bar. There's only one level place under the rear of the locomotive that is suitable. At the front, they have to use makeshift slings. It's critical to balance these lifting spots, or the locomotive could slip out of the cradle. When they try to slide the bar under the locomotive, they run into more trouble.
Unfortunately, the ground is not flat, so as we're trying to push the beam in, it's too high at this end. We just need to be about 2 centimetres lower at this end, and then it would go straight under.
Andrew calls for some hydraulic jacks to help raise the 100-ton machine off the rails, but these look much too small.
I was hoping for a couple of 5-ton jacks, but...
It's like wishful thinking to me.
Do you think so?
The whole loco's going up now. Believe it or not, we're jacking the whole locomotive up for that small jack, which seems a bit strange, but...
Once the locomotive is raised off the ground, they can attach the cradle. It's now 12 o'clock. The team has just 2 hours to load before departure.
The ship was notified to sail at 2 o'clock.
The floating crane tensions its cables and the lift begins.
Right, come on, lift. The 2 front driving wheels are off the rails. It's still sitting down at the back end, which isn't good. Come on, lift.
The front lifts off, but the heavier rear end refuses to budge.
The ropes under the front are obviously shorter, so we're going to have to add extra wires in so that we get it level when it's being picked up. We don't want it being lifted too much at one end or the other.
Everything takes so long to down-rig and re-rig.
Each adjustment eats up valuable time. They try again.
That is just crap. Andrew!
There's a fundamental problem with the rig. The central loading beam is too long for the job. This forces the cables outwards and puts pressure on the rear lifting bar, pulling it out of position. It's so unstable the beam could dislodge with disastrous consequences. To To solve the problem, the team must swap the long beam for two smaller ones. The two beams will be aligned precisely to ensure the lift is absolutely level.
I think we're starting to work out the levels, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So that's my biggest concern just now.
The setback delays the ship's departure. It's now 3:30 p.m. They're falling further behind schedule, and the dock workers are due to go home in half an hour.
They finish at 4 o'clock.
We can't. It's a nightmare. Complete nightmare.
And now the wind's picking up, giving Andrew something else to worry about.
The locomotive would act like a giant sail if the wind was blown against it, if it really there, and it would obviously start to swing under the crane, which obviously with 100 tons of weight, we want it nice and steady.
If they delay the lift any further, the ship will leave without them. They decide to brave the unpredictable winds.
Come on, let's get it up there and get it on.
It's taken 20 people, 6 hours and 3 lift attempts to achieve a safe touchdown onto the deck of the floating crane. Now it's just a short trip across the harbor to reach the ship, the Diamond Land.
There we are. Diamond Land is waiting.
The captain was saying there's a 5-metre swells forecast for going round the Cape, so it'll need to be well timed out.
Andrew's worried a storm could dislodge the loco in the hold.
They've made some timber battens along the floor, and they've gone around and put some chocks in, although they're just using 6-inch nails, which in a heavy sea that won't stop much.
Rough seas are forecast in the southern Atlantic. If the loco breaks loose, it could be badly damaged as it crashes around the hold. To anchor it safely, they must rest the locomotive on a wooden floor. They will wedge the wheels tightly against the timbers and chain them down. The team works into the night to batten down their precious cargo.
What we're looking for is secure points to hold it down. The guys are marking points to lash it down onto these deck plates here. Sailing at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Are they? There we are. We're away from the bedroom window.
Away from the aircraft window.
At first light the following morning, the ship leaves South Africa. Secured in the hold, the old loco must now survive the Force 7 storm ahead. Four weeks after leaving Durban, the Diamond Land arrives in Hamburg, Germany. Here the locomotive will be offloaded into a smaller vessel that will shuttle it to Great Britain. Jim's anxious to find out whether it survived the journey.
When the ship left Durban, the captain was quite concerned about the weather reports going round the Cape. He'll be quite relieved when we lift it out of the hold and we see that it's okay. I've got to take this picture, it's fabulous, these chains. It's like a work of art. It's like knitting. Okay. Spot on.
In Hamburg, everything goes smoothly. Jim and Andrew can breathe a sigh of relief.
Good job, well done.
After surviving the North Sea crossing, they assume nothing else can go wrong. But this is the train from Bloemfontein. After a journey halfway around the globe, the locomotive has finally reached Britain.
Quite a special day, really, because it's the first time the locomotive has been on British soil for 60 years. But it's a nice moment, at long last, to be back in the UK with it.
But despite all the planning, they face another hitch. There's been a miscalculation.
The idea was to use the dock crane, which can lift 100 tons, but the load with the lifting gear is 102 tons. So it's just over its capacity.
Although the locomotive weighs 96 tons, it needs an extra 6 tons of rigging to secure it for the lift. And that's 2 tons over the weight limit for these cranes. They could call in a 200-ton crane, but the arm of this crane is not long enough to reach the hold from the dockside. The only alternative is to use a massive 1,000-ton crane. Its arm is easily long enough for the job.
We had to hire in this rather large lorry-mounted crane, which comes in about 6 pieces on different lorries. It's going on a special trailer that's been designed and fitted out to carry a locomotive. The only problem with it is that it's got a set of railway lines built into it, but they're set for the UK standard gauge, which is wider than the South African gauge, which is 3'6".
The idea of using a road trailer fitted with rails is to lock the locomotive's wheels and prevent sideways movement on the journey. Because this trailer is designed to carry British locomotives, it has standard gauge rails. But this locomotive was made for South African Railways, which has a narrower gauge. To solve the problem, they must build a new set of rails on top of the trailer. They secure the wheels to the rails with chains to ensure the heavy load does not shift on its road journey to Glasgow.
The trailer has a rise in the centre, so we need to place the driving wheels first and allow the back bogie to drop down onto the set of rails at the back.
Aligning the wheels with the rails is a delicate maneuver. They don't want to lose control when they're so close to a safe landing. But the locomotive suddenly skids on the trailer.
Let's roll it back.
The team react fast to pull it under control.
The show's not over yet. There's another 300 miles to go.
After so many misadventures, the team fear the worst as their loco heads north to Glasgow on some of the country's busiest roads. Ben, the driver, worries the loco may be too tall to clear the bridges.
The bridge heights on the motorway are 16'6", 16 foot on the back end and 16 foot 3 on the front end. That's good enough.
The locomotive only just squeezes through.
Start getting out, boss.
After 60 years in Africa, the locomotive will spend its final days proudly on display in its birthplace, Glasgow.
Okay, Ben. Ah, hang on, Ben. There's, no. Can you go back?
A little tight. That's where we want to back onto, over there, yeah. Be a bit of a surprise, won't it, in the morning? Anybody walking across the square, you know, on the way to work or whatever, suddenly see that this has appeared overnight. Journey of a lifetime, wasn't it? I mean, to do what we did was incredible. Well done, Jim.